The shouting grew louder, voices overlapping with anger and pain as the crowd surrounded the front of Julian's humble home. "You and your wicked family should have never come back," a woman near the front yelled, her face twisted in bitterness. "You dare step foot here, after what your father did? Your father destroyed Richard St. Clair," another man bellowed. "He was our hope. Gave us jobs, fed our children, and was going to build us homes. But your father, your cursed father, killed him and ruined his name." More voices rose up, echoing the same accusations. The pain in their voices was raw, tangled with betrayal and grief. A few men surged forward, fists clenched, clearly preparing to attack, but before they could reach Emory, Julian stepped in front of him like a wall of stone. "Touch him, and you'll have to go through me," he warned, voice low but commanding, eyes blazing with fury. "Blame Devin Montgomery if you must, but not Emory. He's not his father." "He's still a Montgomery," someone shouted from the back. Julian turned on them, his voice rising sharply. "So what? You think ganging up on his son makes you brave? You want justice? Then go knock on Devin's door." "Oh, but you won't, because you know you wouldn't make it past his gate. Cowards." The crowd erupted into angry murmurs, some glaring daggers at Julian, others shifting uncomfortably at his words. But before anything else could spiral, Emory gently reached out and placed a hand on Julian's arm. "Thank you," he said quietly. "But I need to say this myself." Julian hesitated, his eyes locked on Emory's for a second. Then he slowly stepped aside. Emory took a deep breath and stepped forward, facing the crowd with surprising calm. "Good morning, everyone," he began. His voice was steady, but the slight tremble in his fingers betrayed the emotion running beneath. "I know many of you are angry. And you have every right to be," he said. "My father did things that hurt this town deeply. Hurt people you loved." There was a shift in the crowd, an unsure pause. "But I'm not here to make excuses for him. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness on his behalf. I can't," Emory continued. "But I am here to say I'm not him. I loved Richard St. Clair. He was kind to me when I needed kindness. He saw people when others chose to look away." A hush fell over the group. "I want to continue what he started. I want to build the home he dreamed of, the one for the homeless, the sick, the forgotten. Not for my father's redemption. Not even for my own. But because it's right." There were murmurs, doubtful voices. "How do we know you're serious?" a woman called out. "My family doesn't support me," Emory replied. "In fact, I'm going against everything they expect of me by standing here. But I've made my choice. I'm not asking you to believe me with your words. I'll prove it, with actions." Just then, a ripple of surprise went through the crowd as an older man slowly stepped forward. Tall, huge, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples and an aura of quiet authority, it was Matthew, Nikki's father. "Matthew?" someone whispered. "What's he doing here?" Matthew looked around, his gaze silencing the murmurs. "If there's one Montgomery I'd trust," he said clearly, "it's this one." Gasps filled the air. Matthew turned to Emory. "You've grown well, boy," he said, smiling slightly. "You always had a good heart. And now you're choosing the harder road, just like Richard would have wanted. For that, I thank you." He stepped forward and shook Emory's hand firmly, the gesture speaking volumes in front of the stunned crowd. Slowly, the tension began to ease. The angry shouts turned into curious whispers, then quiet nods. Some of the townspeople began murmuring among themselves, a few stepping forward to offer their support, others still skeptical, choosing to walk away in silence. But the shift was undeniable. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Emory found himself surrounded by a small group of people offering to help, a woman who ran the local bakery, a man who used to work at the docks, and an older nurse from the town's clinic. Julian stood nearby, watching it all unfold. His arms were crossed, but there was a strange look in his eyes, not jealousy, not surprise, but something softer. Admiration. Later that day, inside Julian's small but now strangely warm house, the atmosphere shifted from the chaos outside to something more intimate and familiar. The door creaked closed behind them, sealing out the fading murmurs of the crowd. Matthew chuckled, clapping Emory lightly on the back. "It's good to see you again, son. You've grown into a fine young man." Emory smiled, grateful for the kindness. "It's good to see you too, Mr. Matthew. I didn't think you'd even remember me." "Remember you?" Matthew scoffed, amused. "You were always arguing with Julian because of how stubborn he was. You two were like cats and dogs." "I remember every bit." They both laughed, and Matthew's smile softened. "And how's Devon?" he asked, tone lowering slightly. Emory's smile dimmed. "He's the same. Stubborn, proud. Not too happy with me, honestly." Matthew sighed, rubbing his jaw. "That man. He used to be decent, back in the day. But power changes people. I'll never forgive him for what he did to Richard. Neither has the town. It's a heavy shadow he cast." Emory nodded, quiet. "I know. And I'm not asking anyone to forget. I just want to do what I can. Maybe bring a little light back." Matthew looked at him for a long beat and then nodded. "You're doing more than you know." Meanwhile, in the back room, Julian stood with his arms crossed as Nicky leaned against the doorframe, grinning like a fox who'd seen something interesting. "So," Nicky drawled, "you really threw yourself in front of Emory back there like some knight in shining fisherman armor." Julian rolled his eyes. "Don't start." "Oh, I'm already halfway in," Nicky teased. "What was that? Didn't you hate the Montgomerys? He's one of them, you know." Julian's jaw tightened. "I was pretending." Nicky raised an eyebrow. "Pretending?" "Yes," Julian snapped. "You think I actually wanted to defend a Montgomery? I share the same disgust as the rest of the town. But if I acted like that, he'd get suspicious." Nicky tilted his head. "Aha. Right. So all that intense eye contact was strategic, huh?" Julian shot him a look. "Don't push me, Nicky." "Fine," Nicky said with a sigh, "but you have to admit. Emory's kind of admirable. I mean, standing up there alone, defending your father's name, trying to rebuild what was lost. It's not nothing. He's doing it in my father's name," Julian bit out. "That doesn't mean he cared. It just looks good. It buys sympathy. He's still a Montgomery." Nicky narrowed his eyes. "You think he's lying?" Julian didn't answer right away. His voice dropped low. "Even if he's not, it won't matter. When the truth finally comes out, Emory will still choose his family. People like him, they always do. Even if they hate them, they never leave them behind." Nicky crossed his arms, quieter now. "Still doesn't seem fair to punish him for someone else's sins." Julian turned sharply toward him. "Whose side are you on, Nicky?" "I'm on your side," Nicky said, brows raised, taken aback. "Then act like it," Julian snapped. "I've already been slipping. Getting too close. Feeling too much. I almost forgot why I'm here, so don't you dare to." There was a tense pause between them. "We can't afford to get soft now. Emory, Devon, Hale, they're part of the same bloodline. And I want every single thread pulled out." Nicky nodded slowly. "All right. What do you need me to do?" Julian stepped closer, his voice low and cold. "Start looking into Devon's companies. All of them. I want names, numbers, gaps, any weak point we can exploit." Nicky straightened, the usual teasing gone from his eyes. "I'm on it." Later that day, the soft golden light of the setting sun slanted through the crooked window of Julian's house as Emory, Andy, and Nicky prepared to leave. As Nicky distracted Emory near the doorway, Matthew stepped closer to Julian, lowering his voice. "Go easy on him, Julian," Matthew said, eyes sharp with quiet warning. "He's not like the rest of them." Julian didn't respond. He looked straight ahead, unreadable. Matthew sighed, his voice tinged with something like disappointment. "I know you hear me. Just take care of yourself too, son." Still, Julian stayed silent. Matthew gave him a look, one that held more weight than words, then turned and left with Nicky. Meanwhile, Julian and Emory left the house, slowly walking until they stopped near the boats. Julian and Emory stood alone, the silence between them charged but soft. Emory turned to him, his hands loosely clasped in front of him. "Thank you," he said earnestly, looking straight into Julian's eyes. "For everything. For getting Julian Halstead to sponsor the project. For standing up for me earlier. You didn't have to do any of that." Julian shifted awkwardly, trying to ignore the way Emory's voice made something twist in his chest. Then, Emory stepped forward and gently took Julian's hand in his. Julian stiffened slightly at the contact, his heart betraying him with a thud against his ribs. "I owe you an apology too," Emory continued, his gaze sincere. "I misjudged you. I thought you were. I don't know, just some loud, unruly, annoying guy. Maybe even a little savage." He laughed softly at himself. "But you're not. You're not who I thought you were at all." Julian tried to laugh it off, tugging at the corner of his lips. "Well, I am still a bit unruly. And annoying. You had that part right." Emory laughed, a real, bright, unguarded sound that filled the space between them. "You really enjoy teasing me, don't you?" he said, half playful, half exasperated. Julian tilted his head slightly, watching him. And without really meaning to, the words slipped from his lips before he could stop them. "I don't know why," he murmured, "but teasing you and seeing you smile like that makes me happy." Emory blinked. The laughter faded into something quieter. Softer. He looked at Julian, and Julian looked back. The air between them seemed to stretch and hold as their eyes locked. They both leaned in just slightly, like instinct. Like gravity. For a moment, neither of them breathed. But Emory's eyes widened. He quickly pulled away, face flushed, breath uneven. I should go," he stammered. "Thanks again. Really." And just like that, he turned and rushed out, practically fleeing the moment, leaving Julian standing there, lips parted in surprise. Emory clutched his chest as he walked, heart racing. "Why do I keep feeling this way around him?" he thought. "What is this?" Back inside, Julian ran a hand down his face and sighed. "Get a grip," he muttered to himself. "Don't get fazed by some angel-faced Montgomery." He turned away from the door and clenched his jaw. This isn't about him. Or his brother. This is about justice, for my father. For the truth. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit corner of a sleek but quiet bar on the edge of town, Hale Montgomery sat nursing a half-empty glass of whiskey, his fingers lazily tracing the rim. The faint jazz humming from the speakers didn't help soothe the growing irritation tightening in his chest. He took another sip and sighed, eyes narrowing as he replayed his earlier conversation with Julian. The whole thing had left a sour taste in his mouth. Julian had sounded different, distant, serious. Talking about wanting to be open with their relationship like it was some sacred union. Hale scoffed under his breath. "Open?" he muttered to himself, annoyed. "Does he think this is some fairy tale?" He leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his soft, chestnut hair. He needed a distraction, something fun, wild, something to remind him who he really was. As if on cue, two familiar voices broke through the bar's hum. Well. If it isn't the star of the Montgomery drama himself, said a tall man in a designer blazer, his voice laced with theatrical flair. Hale looked up and grinned. Owen. Marcus. The two well-dressed, openly gay men swept in like a breeze of wealth and perfume, clearly delighted to see him. They were his old friends who were well known in town for their philandering ways, but their energy was unrelenting. "We heard you were back in town," Marcus said, sliding into the seat across from Hale, "and we just had to come see for ourselves. The city's been so dull without you." Owen leaned closer, all smiles. "How's the acting gig going?" Hale laughed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "If only. It's not exactly a smooth ride. Directors keep casting the same boring faces." "Well, lucky you," Marcus said, wagging his eyebrows. "There's a party tonight. Very exclusive. Very fabulous. And guess who's going to be there?" Hale raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Owen grinned. "Thorne Mateo." Hale blinked. "Thorne Mateo? The director?" Both men nodded eagerly. "Well," Hale smirked, finishing his drink with one final gulp, "count me in." Back at the Montgomery mansion, Hale hummed to himself as he dug through his closet, tossing aside coats, shirts, and accessories with increasing frustration. He needed to look sharp tonight. Memorable. Suddenly, he remembered. "Wait, that silver clutch," he muttered. "The one Dad gave us." There were two, one for him, one for Emory. But Hale had stupidly left his behind during a scandalous weekend at a now-ghosted lover's place. Typical. He paused, eyes drifting toward the hallway. Emory's room. With a sly grin, Hale padded down the hall and stopped at the door, wide open, as usual. "Honestly, Em. You make it so easy." He slipped inside, scanning the space with a mocking eye. It was simple, far too tidy. Like Emory himself, predictable. Boring. He went straight for the drawer where he guessed it might be, and bingo. There it was. The clutch lay pristine under some folded clothes. But just as he reached for it, his fingers brushed against something unusual, a latch tucked into the side of the drawer. Curious, he tugged at it and revealed a false bottom. And underneath, a journal. Hale's eyes lit up with wicked amusement. "Don't tell me. Emory keeps a diary." He flipped it open, half expecting boring poetry or sermon-like ramblings. But as his eyes scanned the first few entries, he burst out laughing. "Oh my God," he chuckled. "He really is a loser." He read a few more lines, jaw-dropping at some of the confessions and emotional scribbles inside. "This is gold." Without hesitation, he scooped both the diary and the clutch bag, stuffing them under his arm. He slipped out of the room, chuckling to himself all the way to his own. "Tonight just got a lot more interesting," he said to no one in particular, tossing the items into a drawer and locking it. At the lavish rooftop party glittering under fairy lights and soft house music, Hale was in his element. His laughter rose above the clinking of glasses as he leaned against the marble-topped bar, a cocktail in hand, dressed in a deep wine velvet blazer that hugged him in all the right places. He looked stunning, and he knew it. His friends, Owen and Marcus, flanked him, equally animated and dressed to impress. "Hale, darling," Owen drawled, nudging him. "It's time we introduced you to the man who can change your life." Marcus gave a wink. "Thorne Mateo himself." Hale raised an eyebrow as a large, round man waddled into view, wearing a silk scarf, tight black trousers, and enough rings to sink a boat. Thorne Mateo, the infamous and influential movie director. He was already eyeing Hale like he was dessert. Well, Thorne said, voice syrupy. "You must be Hale Montgomery. You're even more delicious in person." Hale chuckled, turning on the charm. "You flatter me, Mr. Mateo." "Call me Thorne," the director purred, placing a heavy hand on Hale's waist. We should talk, somewhere quieter. I think you've got main character energy. Hale smirked. He was used to this. He didn't mind the game, especially if it meant an in. Lead the way. But just as they began moving toward a private section, a sudden voice cut through the music. Hale. They turned to see Ethan, disheveled, clearly agitated, pushing through the crowd. His eyes were locked on Hale with that same intense glare Hale knew too well. Ethan. Hale blinked, caught off guard. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed Hale's arm and yanked him away from Thorne, who stumbled back with an indignant gasp. Hey! Hale snapped, jerking his arm. What the hell are you doing? The commotion drew stares. Hale's face flushed with anger as he faced Ethan, his voice rising. You just love showing up and ruining my moments, don't you? I told you, we're over. So quit acting like some jealous boyfriend. It makes me so sick. Ethan's jaw clenched. Well. Stop being a whore then, maybe I will leave you alone. How dare you? Hale's face twisted in disbelief, but Ethan wasn't finished. You're not going to be able to act like this for long, Hale, he said, voice lower now, steady. Because soon, you'll need someone to hold you up. Hale frowned, a chill creeping up his spine. What the hell are you talking about? Ethan looked at him squarely. Your family is on the verge of bankruptcy. The world tilted for a moment. Hale blinked, the words hanging in the air like a slap. What? Devon's drowning in debt, Ethan said. He's desperate. That's why he came back to Brighton. Everything's falling apart. Hale stood frozen. His grip on his drink tightened, but his voice came out cold. You're lying. I wish I was, Ethan said softly. You're going to find out soon enough. At the same time, in the quiet study of Julian's mansion, Nikki set a thin file on the oak desk. Julian, dressed in dark tones and sipping a cup of strong coffee, glanced up. What's this? He asked. Proof, Nikki said. The Montgomerys are collapsing. Devon's already started liquidating assets. He's trying to sell off shares, even parts of the estate. Quietly. Julian sat up, interest peaked. He's cornered? Julian asked. Nikki nodded. That's why he returned to Brighton. He's looking for a way out. Maybe trying to score sympathy. Or backing. Julian leaned back in his chair, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face. Good. But we're not going to make it easy for him. He glanced toward the window, where the sun had just started to set, casting a golden hue across the sky. We waited long enough, he said. Thanks for watching. Do like and subscribe to the channel for more episodes.